The Rebbe began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan. And today we give a bracha into the incoming month of Sivan, that everything in the month of Sivan should be at the highest way of success, as we conclude in the Birchas HaChodesh, Yichacheu, L'sasein, L'simcha, L'chaim, L'shalom. We ask for the best for the new incoming month which we are about to enter. And the month which we are about to enter now is the month of Sivan. If we look carefully into the Siddur, while every Shabbos Mevorchim we do not say of HaRachamim in davening, which is recited before Musaf, after Birchas HaChodesh, the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur writes, there is one month, one Shabbos Mevorchim that is an exception. And on that Shabbos Mevorchim we do recite the Av HaRachamim. And that is the Shabbos Mevorchim of the month of Sivan. Why is Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan different than the rest of the Shabbos Mevorchims throughout the entire year? Actually, Shabbos Av HaRachamim is some sort of a type of a tachnun. Tachnun we don't say on Shabbos, but this is similar to a tachnun which we recite on Shabbos, which is permitted to recite on Shabbos. So in other words, in all other Shabbos Mevorchims, it is some sort of a joy, more joyous, it's more sort of festive than the Shabbos Mevorchim of the month of Sivan. That is why in all other Shabbos Mevorchims we do not say Av HaRachamim, as opposed to Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan, we do recite Av HaRachamim. What is so different in the month of Sivan, opposing all other months? So the Rebbe continues that obviously, says the Alter Rebbe does not write this. He just gives flat statement that we do recite it on the Shabbos Mevorchim of Sivan. However, the Rebbe goes on, it seems that the reason would be that it is quoted in Shulchan Aruch that Chav Sivan, 20 days in the month of Sivan, was a tonus. In other words, it was a day that something happened to Yidden. A certain period of time there was a Gzeira on the day of Chav Sivan, and that is why many used to fast years ago on the day of Chav Sivan. So being that something very unwanted happened in the month of Sivan, that is why on the Shabbos Mevorchim of the month of Sivan we also recite Av HaRachamim. However, the fast of the month of 20 days in the month of Sivan, this the Rebbe says, so to speak, like disappeared. In other words, we do not find people today that should feel that they should fast on 20 days in the month of Sivan. On the other hand, this inyan of saying Av HaRachamim, this we still adhere to, which is a practice which we do on the Shabbos Mevorchim of Sivan, and we do not do it on any other Shabbos Mevorchim of the year. And the Rebbe also stressed that if we look carefully, we notice that there are two different expressions. There's an expression referring to the Rebishter of Harachamon with a lang nun at the end. There's another expression of Harachamim as this tefillah begins. What is the difference between Av HaRachamon and Av HaRachamim? The Rebbe says the difference is a very big one. Av HaRachamon means we're referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a father of mercy, a merciful father. That is when it is used the word Rachamon with a langanun at the end. Av HaRachamim, we also refer to the Rabbeinu Shalom, but we refer here to him as the source of all Rachmanis, the father of all pity in the world. Av HaRachamim, the father of pity, the source of Rachamim. And in this Tefillah Takeh, this is how the Nusach is, not Av HaRachamon, as we find in other Tefillahs. Here we express ourselves and we refer to the Rabbeinu Shalom as Av HaRachamim, the source of all Rachmim, the source of all Rachmanis, source of all pity. And referring this way to the Rabbeinu Shalom, this is a tefillah which we recite on Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan, but we do not recite it on any other Shabbos Mevorchim. Rebbe went in to explain that in general the idea of a tanis, why Bichlal was a tanis set aside to commemorate a day when something sad took place. So as explained in the Rambam, The Rambam explains, the Rebbe says, that the idea of Etanis is to awaken us to tshuva. In other words, this is an appropriate day, being that something sad took place on that day, some sort of a gzeira or something similar. That is why this day is very appropriate for us to fast, and the fasting is to bring out an idea of tshuva. Memela, if now we are stressing the fact that in the month of Sivan we do recite Ava Rachmim on the Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan, though we do not recite it on any other Shabbos Mevorchim, and this is because something unwanted took place. Obviously, the Rebbe says the same inyan, isn't it? It's also a reminder for tshuva to us. The fact that we say Ava Rachamim today, and we do not say it on any other Shabbos Mevorchim, this is a reminder for tshuva. And the Rebbe went in a lengthy explanation how the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, based on the pasuk Va'asei matamim. There's a pasuk that says, when Yitzchak requested from his sons at his older age, Va'asei matamim, make me delicious food. So the Alter Rebbe explains matamim lashon rabim. There are two types of delicious foods. Naturally, the Alter Rebbe is talking in the spiritual sense. There's one derech in Avodas Hashem, which is the derech of iskafia, and another derech in Avodas Hashem, which is the derech of ishapcha. Very briefly, iskafia meaning holding ourselves back, controlling ourselves back from doing the improper things. However, yet further derech in Avodas Hashem is the fact of ishapcha, turning over the bad to good. In other words, the same koiches and the same power and the same enthusiasm which one had when he did the unwanted things and when he did dvar aveira and things which were not called for, the very same koiches are utilized now for kedusha, for doing satisfied and wanting things, and desirable things, desirable actions. So this is the whole idea of benching the month of Sivan. And when we bench the month of Sivan, we right away enter with reciting the tefillah of Ava Rachamim. By reciting the tefillah of Ava Rachamim, it awakens with us a desire to tshuva, and in what extent sight for the Avodas Hashem of Iskafia, and as well for the other path of Avodas Hashem, which is a higher derech in serving the Rebishter, the derech of Ishapcha. And in this sikha, the Rebbe also referred how we see about the greatness of Hafatzas HaMayonis, spreading the Indian of the Mayonis of Chassidus, the wellsprings of Chassidus, and the Rebbe stressed the idea is that we take the Mayon, we take the well, and we transfer the well all over, we carry it all over, we bring it all over to each and every Yid. And with the extreme strength, when did Hafatzas HaMayonis begin? The Rebbe referred to the famous Indian that it began after the Alter Rebbe came back from Peterburg. In other words, after the Alter Rebbe being arrested, and he came back and was released, that is when Hafatzas HaMayonis, the spreading of Chassidus, really began very, very forceful. There's an expression from the Rebbe Nishma Seiden, that's the Rebbe Rashab, the Friedrich Rebbe's father. He once expressed himself that there's a Gemara, the Gemara says, Ma hazayis hazeh, ki shekoitchen noisei, hu noisei neshamnoi, just like an olive, when an olive is squeezed and crushed, that is when the olive gives his pure oil. The very same, he used the expression after the Alter Rebbe going through prison, which is also a meaning of ketisha, of being pressured, and being, which was naturally very painful to the Alter Rebbe. That is when afterwards he began pouring oil, the spiritual oil, which is the oil of Chassidus, the inyan of Hafatzas HaMayonis of Teres Chassidus, began in a very, very forceful way. This inyan applies to the month of Sivan, regardless of the kviyas on what Shabbos the Shabbos Mevorchim is. More particular this year, the Shabbos Mevorchim of Sivan falls out on the Shabbos when we read in the Torah, Behar-Bechukosai. We conclude the Sefer Vayikra, and we read both of the Sedras, the Sedra beginning with Behar Sinai, and Bechukosai, in Bechukosai Teleich. Together with it, there's another inyan in this week's Sedra. Another inyan in this week's Kviyas of Shabbos Mevorchim, that Shabbos Mevorchim falls out on the Shabbos which is Milo, which elevates the day of Lag Ba'omer. Lag Ba'omer was Sunday, and we know that the whole inyan of Shabbos is that Shabbos elevates all the inyanim which transpire throughout the week. So Simchasei Shel Rashbi, This great day, which Rab Shimon ben Yochai referred to it, that it is his day of joy, is elevated on this Yom HaShabbos. And this is the day when we bench the month of Siv. Rabbi said, when we look at the two Sedras, Behar and Bechukosai, obviously there are two contradicting concepts. What's the Pshat Bechukosai? We're referring to the Chukim, to the commandments which HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us. And as we know, mitzvahs are divided into three categories: Eidos, Chukim, and Mishpatim. The word Chukah applies to those mitzvahs which we do not understand any reason or any logic why Hashem told us to fulfill these mitzvahs. And as Chazal tell us, Gzeiro Gazarti, Chukah Chokakti, Hashem Yisborach says, this is my decree, this is my will. Ein lecha reshus laharer acharera. You have no permission to give any thinking, to think after what I've commanded. In other words, we have to follow what Hashem Yisborach has told us to, with the fullest measure of Kabbalah soil, acceptance of the yoke, listening to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do. That is the inyan of Bechukosai. That is what the whole Sedra stands for. Behar, what's the touch Behar? Behar Sinai, the mountain of Sinai. Rabbi says it's explained in Hasidus that the Har, we know that the world is divided into four categories: Doimim, Tzemeach, Chai, and Medaber. Naturally, earth is Doimim. However, mountains are considered the Tzemeach Shebedoimim. The fact that mountains are higher than a regular spot, than a regular piece of land, it formulates to a higher spot. In other words, this is the idea of Tzemeach, of something growing within Daimim. Here the Rebbe mentioned the Rechadav, he says that it is mentioned in Kisvei HaArizal regarding the formulation of mountains, that mountains formulated in the world by the fact that an accumulation of dust and earth reached to this specific point, and this is how mountains came about. And the Rebbe says, for those that know it from the Kisvei HaArizal, it's wonderful. Those that know it from studying it in secular sources and having to come out to secular sources, it's a shame that time has to be wasted to find inyanim in secular sources. At the time these inyanim are discussed, we have everything in Torah. And in Kisvei HaArizal, this is what Arizal discusses regarding the formulation of mountains. However, the Rebbe says, those that did go through and did have to come on to waste their time and study it and gain this knowledge from secular sources, hopefully they will utilize their knowledge for inyanim of Avodas Hashem as well. So Mamela, the whole idea of Behar is an idea of a mountain, of growth. The concept of growth obviously is contradictory to the fact of Kabbalah soil. Kabbalah soil is a standstill position. It's a position of Gzeiro Gazarti, Chukah Chokakti, Ve'en Lecha Reshus Laharer. On the other hand, we're discussing Har Sinai. Har is an inyan of tzmichos, of not constantly remaining on one level of Kabbalah soil. It's an inyan of growth of tzmicha. That's the whole idea of tzmicha, is constantly keeping on growing and being fruitful. The Rebbe compared it like we find B'negei the Aron, we find the same, which is famously discussed in Hasidus. On one hand, we find that the Torah tells us measurements which the Aron required when the Aron was erected in the Mishkan in the Beis HaMikdash. Had to have such a size, Amasayim, 2 Amasayim v'chetzi Okoi, Amma v'chetzi Rochboi, an exact description what the size of the Aron should be. On the other hand, we find Chazal tell us something very strange. Makom Aron eina min hamidah. That the Aron really did not take up any place. It was an area which was higher than place. It was eina min hamidah, did not take up any physical space. Same the Rebbe says, B'negei, these two inyanim of Behar and Bechukosai, we have to come on to both of them. On one hand, it's required from a Yid that everything he does has to be with an approach of Kabbalah soil, of Gzeiro Gezarti, Chukah Chokakti, that's the inyan of Bechukosai Chukim, Ve'en Lecha Reshus Laharer Achareh. And on the other hand, we are stressing that it's required from a Yid an inyan of Tzemeach, an inyan of Tzmicha, to constantly to keep on growing. However, we are told at the same time, where we fulfill inyanim according to Tzmicha, which reflects Seichel, which reflects dedication an intellectual dedication. However, how far intellectual an inyan in Torah goes and inyanim in Torah go, at the same time we have to fulfill these inyanim, not forget that there's an inyan of Kabbalah Soil, there's an inyan of Gzeira Gazarti, there's an inyan of Chukim. At the same time, when we fulfill inyanim of Yiddishkeit, we have to do it in accordance with an inyan of Tzmicha. What's the inyan of Tzmicha? Intellect. In other words, we have to guide ourselves according to Seichel. Properly. However, at the same time, not to forget that everything we do still has to be controlled. Though on one hand it's an inyan of Har Sinai, but at the same time we have to be controlled by the inyan of Chukim, by the inyan guiding ourselves, that there's everything we do has to be reflected within a thought of Kabbalah Soil as well. In other words, not to let our own intellect guide us, and our own feelings and our own emotions guide us, but everything has to be controlled by the inyan of Kabbalah Soil, doing things accordingly as Torah, as the Rabbeinu Shalom wants these inyanim should be fulfilled. Talking about the greatness of Rashbi and the greatness of Lag B'Omer, which is a great day, as the Rebbe spoke about Lag B'Omer, the Rebbe spoke at the parade, and the Rebbe spoke about it later in the Farbrengen again. The Rebbe referred to the incident of Rabbi Avram HaLevi, that there was a Talmud of the Arizal by the name of Rabbi Avram HaLevi who would recite Nachem daily. Nachem is the tefillah which we say Tisha B'Av, because this is the tefillah where we express our mourning on the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. However, this particular Rabbi Avram HaLevi would recite the tefillah of Nachem each and every single day. Why? Because every day he felt the pain and the agony of the fact that mourning on the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Rebbe spoke at length Lag B'Omer. When did he recite it? Only on every weekday or on Chol HaMoed. However, the Rebbe says on Shabbos he did not recite it. Why? Because it is brought in Svarim, where did he put this tefillah? Where did he say it? He said it in the tefillah of V'sishkoi. In other words, it's in Shemoneh Esrei, where we recite V'sishkoi b'sech v'lishalayim mircha. On Shabbos we don't say the tefillah of v'lishalayim mircha. So that is why on Shabbos he didn't say it. However, at any other Shemoneh Esrei, where we do say v'lishalayim mircha, each and every weekday, including Chol HaMoed, which is also part of a Yontif. And on Yontif we do recite the tefillah of Yerushalayim Mircha, V'sishkem b'seicha kasher dibarta. And all of these tefillahs, Rabbi Avram HaLevi entered also the tefillah of Nachem. He said it on Lag B'Omer as well. For saying it on Lag B'Omer, he was punished. Min HaShamayim. So from here, we derive what kind of a great Yom Simcha Lag B'Omer is. So Lag B'Omer is a tremendous day of Simcha. Here the Rebbe portrayed some individual who, instead of being part of the great inyanim which took place here on Lag B'Omer, where the Rebbe used the expression, where Rab Shimon ben Yochai Rashbi was present and dancing with Yiddish kinder, these individuals decided that it's the most appropriate day to go home and have a befitting meal as it befits for such a great Yom Simcha. And therefore the fish that he wanted for this meal, or the meat that he wanted for this meal, and all the other delicious, suitable things which he thought were befitting for this meal, and the conveniences which he wanted to make himself at this meal, to taking off his jacket and making himself very comfortable. And then he definitely demanded from his wife to put together the real proper meal which is befitting for such a day of Lag B'Omer. And naturally, the Gemara tells us, Eize Isha Ksheira, who's considered an Isha Ksheira? A woman that fulfills the will of her husband, she's considered an Isha Ksheira. So, naturally, the Rebbe spoke about it in a very negative way, how this person, instead of being part of the Simcha of Lag B'Omer, where we had Reb Shimon ben Yochai dancing with Yiddish kinder, this person went ahead and celebrated Lag B'Omer in a very different way, in a very unsuitable way, by just enjoying it in such gashmiistic format of enjoying a real delicious meal and demanding for it and insisting for it without giving it anything of the ruchnius which this great day of Yom Simchas Shel Rashbi really calls for. Later in the Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe learned the Rashi in this week's Sedre, and as it's customary this half of the year also to learn a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Rebbe also referred to another inyan which he spoke about in the Pesach Sheni Dike Farbrengen. In the Farbrengen of Pesach Sheni, Rebbe mentioned that we know that on Pesach Sheni we do not say Tachnun. Why? Because Pesach Sheni is a Yontif. The question, however, arises, Rebbe says, what would be regarding to Pesach Sheni night? In other words, the evening from the 14th of Iyar to the 15th. Does that evening still carry a status of Pesach Sheni, or doesn't it? For example, where is it? What is it negay? It's negay l'gabe Krishma Shalamita. In Krishma Shalamita, there are certain pieces which we do not recite on days that we don't say Tachnun. The evening from 14th of Iyar to 15th of Iyar, Alpi Halacha, Alpi Minhagi Yisrael, what status does that evening have? So the emes, the Rebbe says, we find in the Alter Rebbe, in the Siddur. In the Siddurim it's printed in Shachis, between, right after Ashrei, before Volotzion, before Lamanatzeach Yancha, all the days that Tachnun is not recited on are listed. As well, those days that we don't say Tachnun, Erev that day. Erev Yontiv, we also don't say Tachnun. So this here is from the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe here mentions all the days that we don't recite Tachnun on. However, nothing here is mentioned with regard to the day, to the evening after Pesach Sheni. Now the next day after Pesach Sheni is Tezvav, 15 days in the month of Iyar. Definitely we do recite Tachnun. No question about it, that day is not considered a Yontif. The question is only B'negei the evening from between the 14th and 15th of Iyar. However, the Shaila is, when was the Korban Pesach eaten? For those that brought a Korban Pesach on 14 days in the month of Iyar, they were able to eat the Korban Pesach on this night. So Mamela, eating of the Korban Pesach, that's the inyan of this day. So Vibal that the Korban Pesach was eaten on this evening between Yudalit and Tesvav. So the fact Tzvira we count Tzvira the Pesach Sheni, the Farbrengen, the Rebbe pointed out many in Yonim where we find that the night has a shaykhs to the next day. On the other hand, we find the night still has a shaykhs to the day that's passing. However, here, B'negeya, the fact whether we should say Tachnun on that night or not, obviously this evening still has a shaykhs to the night of Pesach Sheni, to the day of Pesach Sheni. In today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe referred to it again. And the Rebbe mentioned that it was brought to his attention B'negeya de Munkacher. Munkacher was a Rebbe in Hungary. In fact, he was a Munkacher dynasty, Munkacher Hasidim. And he was a very big Bal Halacha. And throughout the Farbrengen, throughout the years, at many occasions, the Rebbe refers to him, very, very respectful. The Munkacher had Svarim that he wrote. He wrote many Svarim, but the Svarim that he's famous for is a Svarim called Minchas Elazar. And then it seems like somebody brought to the Rebbe's attention that the Minchas Elazar would say Tachnun on the 15th of Iyar. So whoever brought this to the Rebbe's attention wanted to prove, naturally it's no nayis to say that he would say Tachnun on the 15th of Iyar. We all say Tachnun on the 15th of Iyar. Obviously it must mean that the Minchas Elazar felt to say Tachnun on the evening of the 15th of Iyar. In other words, the night after Yudalad Iyar, when the Pesach Sheni is still permissible to be eaten, and we are already entering Tezvav Iyar, l'mashal b'negei Sfira Saimer. We're counting already the Sfira of the 15th of Iyar, and it seems that the Minchas Elazar did say Tachnun on that day. After a lengthy explanation, today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe explained that Bichlal we know that the Minchas Elazar, in many of his psakim, always took a very close and warm and respectful approach to the opinion of the Alter Rebbe and Halacha. The Rebbe proved that it seems that we must say that the Minchas Elazar's Tachnun was Taka B'negei the 15th of Iyar. And to say that the Minchas Elazar said Tachnun on this evening between the 14th and the 15th of Iyar would be very strange. And as the Rebbe again explained, that was the evening of eating the Korban Pesach. And the Korban Pesach, this is what makes Pesach Sheni into a Yontif. Pesach Sheni is a Yontif only because on that day, those that missed out bringing the Korban on the original Pesach, on Pesach Rishon, they were the ones that were able to be mashlam to bring it on Pesach Sheni. And Memela being that the Pesach Sheni the Korban Pesach could be eaten on this evening. This is the evening of a Yontif. And therefore, Al Pi Halach and Al Pi Minig Yisrael, this evening also falls into the category of those days that Tachnun is not recited. In Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, the Rebbe today learned a Mishnah in the 5th Perek, which is today's Perek. Mishnah tells us, Mishnah Tesvav, Arba Midois B'yoshvim Lefnei Chachamim. There are 4 groups, 4 sects of people amongst those who sit before the sages. Actually, if we look into Perek Hamishi, the Perek begins with the Asara Mamoris Nivra Ha'olam. In other words, firstly, the Perek lists many inyanim which involve the number of 10. Then we go to Asara Deiris Modam Vadnoyach, Asara Nisyonis, or a series of Mishnahs discussing the greatness of number 10. Then we go to a series of Mishnahs discussing greatness of number 7, Shiva Dvarim Begoylam, Shiva Mina Paronius. After that, the Mishnah begins with a series of number 4. Now here we have a Mishnah. Mishnah tells us, Arba Midois B'yoshvim Lefnei Chachamim. That there are 4 kinds of people that sit before the sages. What are they? Mishnah goes ahead. Svaig, a sponge. Umashpech, a funnel. Mishameres would mean a strainer. V'nafa would mean a sieve. And the Mishnah explains, Svaig, shuseifeg es hakol. He absorbs everything. Mashpech, shamachnis bezu, umoitzi bezu. Takes from one end and spills out from the other end. Mishameres, a strainer, shemitzias hayayin, v'koletas es hashmorim. Allows the wine to flow out and retains the sediment. Then the last category is a napa. Shemitzias hakemach, v'koletas es hasoilas. It allows the flour dust to pass through and retains the fine flour. This Mishnah comes as a continuation to Mishnah 14. Mishnah 14 discusses Arba Midos B'Hilcha Beis HaMedrash. There are 4 groups, 4 sects of people that go to a Beis HaMedrash. Hailach Ve'ina Oiseh, this is the Mishnah prior to the one we are learning. Hailach Ve'ina Oiseh, he attends, but he does not engage in study. Schar alicha biyadei. He only gets schar, he's only rewarded for going. Oiseh ve'ina hailech, schar ma'aseh biyadei. Hailech ve'oiseh, the one that learns and does, he's a chassid. Loy hailech ve'loy oiseh, he's defined as a rasha. In continuation to this Mishnah comes the Mishnah which we just learned, about the 4 different types of people that are yoshvei lefnei chacham. So the Rebbe says there are some commentaries in Mishnah that want to tie together these 2 Mishnahs and say that the same 4 categories that the Mishnah is talking about in Mishnah 14, it is the same 4 categories that the Mishnah is talking about in Mishnah 15. The Rebbe says if we look into it, it is strange to learn so. Furthermore, Mishnah Yudala discusses Arba Midos B'Hilcha Beis HaMedrash. Hilcha Beis HaMedrash, what means? People that go to the Beis HaMedrash and learn. What? We know in Chazal there's a Beis HaKnesses and a Beis HaMedrash. Category of Beis HaKnesses would be where davening would take place. Beis HaMedrash is where learning would take place. So the Mishnah tells us there are 4 people that are Hilcha Beis HaMedrash. Mishnah 15 uses a different expression. Arba Midos, not B'Hilcha Beis HaMedrash, B'Yoshvim Lefnei Chachamim. Those that sit in front of sages. So we see it's a different type. It's a different type of a setup. And if we would be talking about Talmidim, when a Talmid goes to his Rebbe, the proper expression is not, he's not a Yoshev Lefnei Chachamim. He should be an Oimid, he should stand, he should rise in front of his Rebbe. The expression Yoshvim Lefnei Chachamim, this in itself shows us it's a different type of, something different is going on here. And this requires interpretation. What is the Mishnah here talking about? Also, it's very strange. The Mishnah is using 4 different types of kalim, 4 different types of vessels. And with these vessels, the Mishnah is describing different characters, different attitudes of various people. So after an introduction, the Rebbe says, in other words, the Rebbe says it's very, doesn't want to say pirushim of his own, but the Rebbe says, Benegeya, saying it interpretation here in Mishnah, and especially something which the ultimate goal of this Pirush is, it should bring to additional inyanim in Limud HaTorah and to Yirah Shamayim and to Hafatzas HaMayonis. So he feels it would be permitted to say a Pirush in this Mishnah, though it is not quoted in Mefarshei HaMishnayos. And the Rebbe is learning as follows. Arba midos b'yoshvim l'fnei chachamim. There are 4 sects of people that are yoshvim l'fnei chachamim. We are not talking about somebody who is going to Beis HaMedrash to learn. We are talking about someone who is past the stage. Someone who is these type of individuals that sit around the environment of Talmidei Chachamim. In other words, we're talking about a person who is very learned, and he's past the stage of being a hoylech Beis HaMedrash. In other words, he's not a Talmud. We're talking about somebody who's past the stage of being a pupil, past the stage of being a student. And this individual person fits into a category, he's a yoshev l'fnei chachamim. He sits around our sages. Amongst these 4 categories that sit around our sages, there are 4 different types of people. What's the pshat? There are 4 different types of people. There are 4 different attitudes which have to be utilized at different times for these people that are in the category of Yeshim L'fnei Chacham. In other words, we're talking here about a high caliber person. We're talking about somebody who's a chaver, he's close to the Chachamim. And there are 4 different attitudes which these people have to utilize. There's a sfeig. Sfeig is a sponge. Shu seifeg es hakol. We find the expression sponge, the Rebbe says in Mishnah B'negei Halacha as well. We find it B'negei Mikveh. Mikveh, as the expression is found. What's the pshat? The person absorbs everything. In other words, he taka absorbs everything. But not everything that he absorbed, he can relate and share with others. We find in Shas, for example, many times, halacha ve'ein moirin kain. We find the expression, this is the halacha. However, this is not how we pass them. If somebody comes and asks a question, we will not pass him this way. Why? In other words, the halacha could be lakula, and we will pass him this way. It may be misunderstood, and people will not understand it properly. So that is why the Chachamim have put their foot down and said, halacha, this is taka the halacha, however, ein moirin kain. So this individual person, he's a sfeig, he's a sponge. He absorbs everything within him, everything. However, he cannot go ahead and share everything with the people around him. Then we find the contrary. At times, one has to be a mishameres. a mashpech. A mashpech being a funnel. Shemachnis bezu, a moitzi bezu. Well, all his wisdom and all his knowledge, whatever he has learned and whatever he heard from his rebbes, is a yoshev l'fnei chachamim. This is the person we're talking about. He has to go ahead and share it with other people. He has to take these inyanim in Torah that are coming to him. He's a machnis bezu, like a funnel, a moitzi bezu, and gives it out and shares it with other people. Then we have a mishameres. Shemoitzias hayayin v'koiletas as hashmorim. It allows the wine to flow out and retains the sediment. Here the Rebbe brought a different example. For one who fits into the category of a yoshev l'fnei chachamim, at times he has to criticize Yidden also. He has to put Yidden, has to be the mechiach, and he found wrongdoings within Yidden, and he has to put them on the proper path and tell them how they should act. And this is something extremely delicate. And when he got the information on all the wrongdoings which these specific Yidden individuals, a group of people whom he's going to address whatever they did, he got the information, and he knows all the avlas they did, all the wrongdoings. However, when he criticizes them for it, the critic which he's bringing to them has to be brought in a proper way. He has to divide it. In other words, all he could do, he has to give it very delicately. He has to be moitzi es hayayin v'koilet et hashmorim. All he could give them is the wine, and the impure parts that he has to keep within himself. At times when a person is criticized, you can't go over to him and tell him, it goes on, you've done so and so and so and so, you've committed such bad things. This he has to keep within himself. That he cannot share to him. He knows it, but he cannot give it out. All he's got to do is criticize him and put him, be a mechiach in such a way and in such oisius and such wording that the person will understand himself and realize himself to get on the proper derech and know what to do. However, to criticize a person has to be done very, very delicately. You cannot bring yourself into a position where that person will never want to face you again, or you will never be able to face him again. So that is why it has to be done in a way of meitzias hayayin v'koletas hashmo. Then we come to the fourth category. The fourth category is a nafa. Nafa, the Mishnah says, meitzias hakemach v'koletas hasoilis. It allows the flour dust to pass through and retains the fine flour. Here again, when we refer to a Gemara, we find the expression of kemach and soilas. We find it in Gemara also. We find kemach had to be used to work ibud oiros, in order to, in those days when they want to work out, manufacture a good piece of leather, a good piece of oir, a piece of skin from a behemoth, they would process it with kemach, with wheat, with flour. Also we find, the Rebbe referred, when the Malachim came to Avram and Sarah, we find the expression, Avram told Sarah that she should serve soilas, she should serve the fine flour. However, Sarah was only willing to serve the kemach. So metzias. So we find there's a difference between kemach and soilas. This the Rebbe interpreted, brought an example how we find, for example, by Chayni Hamagel. We find by Chayni Hamagel, when the world Alma Tzorich Lemitra, when the world was in need of rain, and Chayni came and he was mispal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave rain. And he gave rain in such a strong way, so strong that the people weren't able to stand the rain. And the people came complaining to Chayni Hamagel, Reif Teiva, you're giving us too much of it. What does it mean? In the eyes of Chayni Hamagel, this is what they needed. However, the rest of the world around them, the recipients of the bracha, the recipients of this taiv, they were not in a position to digest all of the taiv which Chayni Hamagel was giving to them, got for them through the bracha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore they came begging to him, stop the rain is too strong for us. What does this mean? At times one has to be in a position for allowing the flour dust to pass through. However, the fine flour, he's not in a position of sharing with the rest of the world. Chayni Hamagel was, in other words, the people, the world was in need of rain, as Chazal tell us. However, to such an extent, as Chayni Hamagel wanted to get the rain for the Yidden, they weren't able to take it. In other words, they weren't able to absorb the fine flour with it as well. They were only able to take the flour dust and not the better part of the flour. The same Mishnah tells us that these type of situations are aroused by people that are Yoshvim Ufnei Chachamim. And we have to know how to handle each and every situation differently and properly. And when we know how to handle all of these situations, in other words, at times a Chacham has to utilize an attitude of a sponge. At times he has to be the contrary. A sponge and a mashpech are two contrary attitudes. At times he has to withhold information and keep information for himself. And at times the drishas hashad, the requirement of the time is, of this particular time, he should not hold back anything. Whatever he has and possesses in the knowledge of Torah, he has to go ahead and share this knowledge with other Yidden. And the same b'negei the other two midas. B'negei the Rashi in this week's Chazarah, in Parshas Behar, right at the beginning of the Chazarah, Kapitel Chavhei, Pasuk Yud. Pasuk here is talking about Yovel. V'kidashtem meshnas hachamishim shana, v'karosem droyer ba'aretz l'chol yeshveha, Yovel hi tiyeh lachem. V'shaftem ish el achuzosoi, v'ish el mishpachtoi teshuvu. And everybody and everyone shall return. Here we're talking, obviously the pasuk here is talking, when we look into Rashi, we know the pasuk here is talking about one who sold himself as a slave. Came Yovel freed every slave. Ukarosem droyer ba'aretz. Droyer is a lashon freedom. Let us learn the Rashi, Ukarosem droyer. La'avadim. Who is freed? All types of slaves. Bein nirtza, bein shaloi kolu loy shei shonim mishenimka. Now here Rashi is letting us in that there are two categories of slaves. There is a slave who sold himself for, as we learned in Pashas Mishpatim, for various reasons, whether he was that poor and he wasn't able to sustain himself and his family, and that is why he sold himself as a slave, or for a person who was a ganad, he was a thief, he's ganvet, and he does not have to pay back what he ganvet, and therefore this bezin sells this person, machuhu bezin, for a period of 6 years. He shall be able to earn some money, so he should be able to pay back what he has stolen. That is one category. That is considered nimka l'sheish. He was sold for a period of 6 years. There is, however, another category which Rashi refers to him here as a nirtza. Nirtza means, if you remember in Pashas Mishpatim, one was sold as a slave for 6 years. However, when the time has come for him to go ahead and be released and go home, to be freed, he claims, "Ahafti es adoni ve'esishti," I enjoy my master, I have no reason to want to go back. So the Torah tells us that this person has to be a nirtza. He's taken over to the doorpost, and he is made a siman in his ear. Why in his ear? So Chazal tell us, "Oizen sheshama b'Har Sinai," this ear that heard on Har Sinai, "Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim," that Yidden we are slaves to whom? To the Rebbeinu Shalom and to no one else. And here this particular person wants to stay on as a slave. That is why he had to go through the procedure of being a nirtza, a physical, I don't know, what is the proper word? His ear was perforated, and he remained on as a slave. Pierced, right. Rashi here is telling us that when Yovel would come, all types of slaves would be released, would be freed. Whether the one whose ear was pierced, or the one who's still in the middle of his 6 years. Rashi says, actually, the Rebbe is asking, actually these two people are two different types of people. The one whose ear was pierced, he's very far from being a tzaddik. He's a person that very, very openly went ahead and did against the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom said, "Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim," and he went ahead and sold himself as a slave. The other person is a simple person who unfortunately was not able to sustain himself and his family, and that is Yomu Chachicha. He's that poor. Poverty led him to it that he had to be sold as a slave. Rashi is opening his pirush. First he mentions the one who is the nirtza, and then he mentions the one shaloi kolu leishei shana mishanimka. Actually, the nirtza should be mentioned second. Very simple. First we talk about the person who goes in the proper way, the right person, the righteous person, but unfortunately he had to be sold as an evet. In other words, he's nimka, and he's still in the middle of his 6 years, and this person, the Torah tells us, that when Yovel comes, he's freed. Then we talk about the sinning person, the one who was already a slave for 6 years. However, this didn't satisfy him, and he wanted to remain as a slave. This person is a sinner, as we just explained. Why does Rashi open his pirush with the one who is a nirtza, rather than opening his pirush with the one who is the proper person, but unfortunately circumstances led to it that he had to be sold as an evet? Furthermore, this one is an evet for a much shorter period of time. So definitely Rashi should have opened with the one who's still in the middle of his 6 years, and then Rashi should talk about the evet who's the nirtza. Let us go a little bit further in the Rashi. So Rashi quotes a Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rashi quotes a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, which is said by Rabbi Yehuda. Mahu loshen droyer. What's the expression of droyer? Droyer means freedom. Kimedayer beidayra v'chulu. Rashi explains, Shedor b'chol mokim shehu roitze ve'einu b'shus acherim. In other words, he's not in anybody else's possession. He's free. He can live and reside wherever he will, wherever he wishes to. That is the expression of droyer. So if the Torah tells us v'karosim droyer ba'aretz, it's an expression of freedom, so that this person is free and released and can live wherever he wants. The emphasis, if we look into the Gemara adds on another couple of words. He lives wherever he wants and travels and sells and peddles with whatever he wants. Rashi does not quote these words. Rashi refers to them only with a v'chulhu. Also the question arises, we know the Rebbe always stresses, what need is it for Rashi to mention Rabbi Yehuda? Rashi's meferish pshut shel mikra. The fact that the Gemara says it b'shem Rabbi Yehuda, that is not a sufficient reason for Rashi to also bring Rabbi Yehuda, that he is the Baal HaMemre, he's the one that said it. So we must say that there's some other reason that's forcing Rashi in Pshut Shel Mikra to tell us that who is the one that says this, it is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi is explaining it as follows. Benegei Rabbi Yehuda was a very, very poor person. There's a Gemara in Nedarim. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yehuda was so poor to the extent that once Rabbi Gamliel, I think it's Rabbi Gamliel, was Geizer a Tainus. And naturally, when Rabbi Gamliel was Geizer Tainus, there was a Tainus, a public fast, everybody came. However, Rabbi Yehuda did not show up. Why did not Rabbi Yehuda show up? Mara says his poverty was to such an extent that he did not have what to put on. Push. And that is why he couldn't come and take part in this public fast which was proclaimed by Rabbi Gamliel. He didn't have what to dress that day. When Rabbi Gamliel, the Tanoim, found out the reason why Rabbi Yehuda didn't show up, they took a set of clothes and they sent to Rabbi Yehuda. They sent him a gift, a proper set of clothes, so Rabbi Yehuda should have what to put on. Mara tells us that when the shliach, when this emissary from the Tanoim came to Rabbi Yehuda took him and walked over to the floor of his house and raised the floor and showed him that he has an accumulation of gold pieces over there, an accumulation of money. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda wanted to show that he's not that poor, that he can't afford. Rabbi Yehuda felt bad. That's what the Gemara explains, that the Tanoim sent him the clothing. So he wanted to show himself that he's really not that poor. So he showed that under the machatzelas, under the little piece of rug, the little piece of little floor, the little linoleum, whatever Rabbi Yehuda had in his house, we can imagine, he showed that he has an accumulation of gold coins. So Rashi right away comments that this was a nes, this was a miracle. Rabbi Yehuda had no gold. Rabbi Yehuda was extremely poor and never even possessed these pieces of gold. But in order Rabbi Yehuda should be able to show that he really is not in need of the clothing which they sent him, he performed a miracle and showed that he had gold coins, gold pieces, which he really never had. And Mulmayla the Rebbe went along and showing this mess. So he refused the clothing which they sent him, and they took it back. So from here we see the great extent of poverty which Rabbi Yehuda lived with. So Rabbi Yehuda, such an man, such a poor person. At the same token we find the Gemara in Pesachim. Gemara in Pesachim tells us that Rabbi Yehuda says that a person is obligated to go out of his way fully and sell everything and save anything possible and go totally out of his way in order that he should be able to accumulate some money and have a house. A person should have his house where to live in. So in other words, by Rashi stressing that who is the one that teaches droyer kimedaya beidaira, shador b'chol mokim shu roitze, that a person should be able to live wherever he wants, should have a house and be free to live wherever he wants. Who is the one that teaches this? Rabbi Yehuda is the one that teaches this. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that stresses the greatness of a house. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that teaches us how important, how beneficial it is for a person when a person has his own home where he can reside and freely walk around and freely live in his house, and he's not a slave to anyone. So that is why Rashi quotes here Rabbi Yehuda, because this adds to the proper understanding of what proper freedom means, or karosem droyer, that it means a type of a freedom that a person has his own house and he's able and capable of walking around freely in his own house. Benegeya, the Seder in Rashi, why Rashi mentions first the Eved Nirtza, and then Rashi mentions the Eved Shaloi Kololoi Sheishanim. So the Rebbe is learning as follows. An Eved who works, who sells himself, that circumstances have forced a person to sell himself as an Eved, this person is being reimbursed for his work. So, that he should be able to sustain his family, or that he should be able to pay for the gneva that he stole. However, the individual that after 6 years is still willing to remain with his master, this is not necessarily for being reimbursed. In other words, this person claims he likes his master, he's not caring for reimbursement, he wants to remain as a slave to him. The child who is learning Chumash knows that Torah is a Torah of tzedek v'yosha. According to Torah, everything is in accordance with righteousness. And therefore, Rashi here is telling us there are two types of categories, two types of avodim, and both of them are freed on Yovel. One category is very simple understood. This is the category of the nirtza. Why? Because the master is not paying anything for the nirtza. If he's not paying anything for the nirtza, then definitely it comes Yovel. Why shouldn't he leave? Yovel proclaims freedom, that these avodim are free to go home. There is a yet bigger nayas Rashi is going ahead. In other words, Rashi is going from step to step. The second category is teaching us a stronger nayas, a stronger chidush. The stronger chidush is even the Eved who is loy kol loy sheishan and mishanimka. He did not pass 6 years since he sold himself. And his master paid him for 6 years of work. So how can we say if Yovel falls out in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th year that this person should also be freed on Yovel, in Yovel, and go back to his family? So the nayas is that the same Torah, the Torah who is so careful with tzedek v'yosha, and the Torah who is so careful about a person paying for something, and about conducting proper rules and regulations in dealings and financial dealings between one person and the other, and about not fooling a person and not being dishonest in business and so forth. This same Torah here is telling us that when it comes Yovel, even though the master has paid him for 6 years of work, the Torah set a special rule and regulation that this is the koyach of Yovel, that all types of slaves, whether he's a nirtza, whether he's loy kol loy sheishanim, all these types of slaves, it comes Yovel, they have to leave and they're free to go home. They are free and they can go back to their homes and get involved into whatever they want, and all their obligations to their masters are broken as of Yovel. While talking about this Gemara, about Rabbi Yehuda, the Rebbe says, we see something very interesting. Rabbi Yehuda, they sent him the clothing, and Rabbi Yehuda wanted to show that he's not in need of the clothing. What did Rabbi Yehuda do? He showed him that he has some gold coins. Where did he show him that the coins are? He showed him that these coins are under his machatzelas, under his little piece of linoleum. Obviously, the Rebbe says, for people who are not afraid of, unless one is afraid of genevis, but otherwise, this is not the proper place where people usually store money. Where do people usually keep money? Money is kept in a drawer. Money is kept in a wallet, in a suitable place for money. People do not keep money under the floor. So, if Rabbi Yehuda already performed this whole ness, Rabbi Yehuda wanted to show them that he's not in need of any type of assistance. He does not need the clothing that they're sending him. And he can afford it and go out and buy clothing on his own. He could have performed the same miracle and explained him the same lesson by having these gold pieces, these gold coins in a drawer, in a shelf, or on the table, and showing them, here I have gold, I'm not in need of it. Here we see that Rabbi Yehuda at the same time wanted to show them a lesson, a deeper moral. True, he wanted to show that he's not in need of it and he has gold coins and he will not accept their assistance. However, at the same time, he wanted to show them what the value of money really is. That money is so secondary and money really has no value, that where is the place of money? Where does money belong? Money belongs under the floor. In other words, he wanted to show them that money really has no chshivas whatsoever. Me'inyan le'inyan, the Rebbe spoke about those people that feel, says, that they have to, comes to decorating their home, they go out and decorate it in the most fashionable way, and they think, why was a country like Iran made for? Definitely so that they should be able to have the Persian rugs to go from wall to wall and decorate their homes. Why was Hong Kong created? So that they should be able to import a piece of furniture and show off that this piece of furniture was erected special for him, made special for him, and he was the one that imported it. And he can show off with this type of furniture which beautifies his house. And actually, who does he show off to? Rebbe says he shows off even to people that cannot afford it like he can. And what is he out? What is his whole intention? His whole intention is to be able to show off that he has such type of carpeting and such type of furniture which no one has the equal to what he possesses in his house. And this is the same idea which Rabbi Yehuda showed to the Talmidim of Rabbi Gamliel. That all in Gashmi is the kinyanim, when we're talking about money or we're talking about furniture or we're talking about anything else, a Yitaka has to have it, true. And through it he can fulfill many mitzvahs and many inyanim tovim. As the Rebbe later in the Farbrengen referred, to the episode by the disciples of Reb Shimon ben Yochai when they complained to Rashbi that they do not have enough money. Reb Shimon ben Yochai walked out with them and he said, they walked over to a valley and the Reb Shimon ben Yochai expressed himself, Bika, hismali dinrim. The valley became full of gold coins. So on one hand, Yidden Taka needed and Yidden should have it. In that particular case, they were embarrassed. The Rebbe did not talk about it today. They were embarrassed, and Rashbi saw to it that all those gold coins went back. But the way the Rebbe spoke about it today, the Rebbe should give Yidden Gashmiyas, and Yidden should have Gashmiyas Ba'achava that should fulfill all their needs, and Yidden should be able to learn Torah peacefully, and be able to give tzedakah peacefully, and have whatever they need. However, we have to know where is it, what is the status of all these Gashmis, the Kinyanim, like the case of Rabbi Yehuda, where Rabbi Yehuda showed that the money is under the Machatzelas, it's under the piece of linoleum in his house. In other words, it's something which is not really primary, it is not of prime importance in our lives, and we have to realize and come to the realization that there are things which are much more important and much chashever. All in Yanim of Torah, mitzvahs, and Yiddishkeit, and Chinuch, and Miftzayim, and all the Yanim which the Rebbe spoke are by far much more important than when we're talking about the Din Rezav, when we're talking about these gold coins. As the participation in the convention of the Sheikh Chabad, which is taking place this weekend here, the Rebbe will talk a Sikha tomorrow evening as well to the women. And today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe also spoke about it. And the Rebbe tied it in to the union of Behar-Bechukosai, and also the fact of this Shabbos coming as a continuation to Lag B'Omer spoken about earlier. The Rebbe said it comes without any say, and we know, and it's stressed all over, the greatness of Simcha. And each and every mitzvah has to be fulfilled through Simcha, and with Simcha, it's open psukim, and Chassidus stresses the importance of Simcha. However, now when we're coming from this great day of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and as just mentioned before, the story of Rabbi Avram Alevi, who was penalized for saying Nachem on this day. So this again is an additional Nesinas Koyach. It's an additional source of strength for us that we have to fulfill all in Yonim with Simcha. And also Benegeh, the Sedras of Behar-Bechukosai. Behar meaning a mountain. There's a pasuk that tells us Meirosh Surim Erenu Umigvois Ashurenu. Pasuk tells us, and Chazal interpreted, that who are the ones that are compared to mountains? It is our ancestors. The Avos and the Imahos, they are the ones that are compared to mountains. Avram, Yitzchak, V'Yankev, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, V'Leah. So this is the Sedra of Behar. We are reminded that we have mountains, they are spiritual mountains that we have to look up to. Who are they? These are our Avos and our Imahos. And the Rebbe goes furthermore. Not only is it our Avos and Imahos, each and every Yid possesses within himself the Avos and the Imahos. And therefore, when we're talking about the mountains, each and every Yid possesses this unlimited value of mountain, which is a hidden treasure which each and every Yid possesses within him. So when we're talking in a Seder of Behar and Bechukosai combined, here we are having this great inyan of the mountains, which reflect the Avos, which this is what this Sedra reminds us, that this is within each and every one of us, and at the same time it is Bechukosai, as stressed earlier. What is the whole inyan of Bechukosai? It comes as a constant reminder of the inyan of Kabbalah's oil, Gzeiro Gazarti, Chukach Hakakti. The Rebbe says he has made his decrees, and we are prohibited, Lahare Rachare, and we have to follow the directions which the Rabbeinu Shalom has given us. And in this Sedra, where Behar and Bechukosai is read together, it's a combination of these two great inyanim. Such a great inyan of Behar, that each and every Yid is a great mountain, because we are part of the Ovis, who were titled as mountains, the Ovis and the Imois, and together with it, simultaneously, we have to remember that Bechukosai, we have to follow the footsteps of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a format of Chukim, Gzeiro Gezarti, Chukach Rekakti, Veilocha Reshus Laharechacha.